So let's get stuck into our next topic. Is Britain anti-old people? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Now, a group of MPs has declared that there is widespread age discrimination in the UK. That's right. The Women's and Equalities Select Committee say that negative stereotypes of older people as frail and helpless, or on the other hand, as wealth-hoarding boomers, had led to ageism being normalised. Dawn, do you agree that there is this stereotyping happening on older people?
I think there is. I think there is ageism in this country, and I'm in my 60s now, and I have never noticed such divide between the generations. I know there's always a generation gap, and everyone always thinks they had it better or had it worse, etc. But I think the divide between the generations now is literally becoming, I think the world is becoming more divisive, remember what you're talking about. But I think the winter fuel allowance being taken away from pensioners, I think has really highlighted how younger people feel that older people have had it easy, have had the best time. They didn't have to worry about anything, none of which is true. And we know that probably around about 5,000 pensioners are going to lose their lives because of the cold this winter. So it's like, you know, they haven't, and that's 10 million people, the most vulnerable people in our society are affected by that. So yeah, old people don't have it easier, but there is this perception amongst the young that that's the case, and it's not true.
It's not true, James.
I'm just delighted to be called young.
Sweetheart compared to me. Yeah, young.
It's not true.
I do completely appreciate what you're saying. I don't think it's necessarily ageism from young people. I think it's more that young people just feel really disenfranchised. They feel really, really let down by this country, by the state. They don't feel like there's any opportunities for them. For example, if we go back 20, 30 years, if you were lucky enough to go to university and study, you had a really good chance of getting a good job at the end of it. I think we can all agree that that was pretty much the case. Nowadays, if you go to university and study, those opportunities just aren't there for you, and you're more likely to just get a minimum wage job. So that's been taken away from them. And then we look at the housing crisis. Young people desperate to get on the housing market, get on the housing ladder, buy their first property, you know, so I think there's a little bit of jealousy there as well, potentially from young people, in that, well, how can I not afford my house when my grandmother or my parents, for example, might have got a house for 20, 30 grand.
Yeah, but compared to the wages they were on at the time, and back then we had inflation of 24.2%.
Yeah, but it worked.
We had 3-day weeks, we had strikes. I mean, you talk to people about how they had to suffer. I mean, I was lucky enough to own my own property, and before everyone starts, but it meant literally living from hand to mouth. We were on the verge of handing those keys back on a monthly basis. It wasn't easy. It wasn't like, oh my God, you had it so easy, just walked into your own first home. No, we worked hard. I'm not saying youngsters don't work hard, but we worked hard. And it was tough. It was really, really tough, but we made it work.
I think it also works both ways as well, because you also get huge swathes of older people saying, oh, well, young people could afford a house if they stopped buying avocados, if they stopped buying Starbucks coffees. There's that attitude that exists as well, that young people are work shy, they throw money around on frivolous things, they take holidays and all this sort of caper, when actually I think it's tough for every generation.
I think it's tough for every generation, and I think all generations need to accept that. However, younger people do have more luxuries than we did back in the day.
But do you agree that the point that James made about the housing ladder, for example, that yes, back in those days you had high inflation, but you know, if you compared the price of houses, you know, when you had to get a mortgage that you were requested to have, I think it's either 3 or 4 times the amount that you earned, you could afford to buy a house. Now you're talking about 9, 10, 11 times. I mean, the disparity between how much money people are able to bring home versus how much properties cost, way, way bigger now than it was just after the war, you know, the boomer generation.
Yeah, but most people didn't buy their own homes as well. I mean, if you're talking about the proper boomer generation, I just slip into that by 11 days. But it's like most people didn't own their own homes. Most people couldn't afford to own the proper boomer generation. Many will be your viewers. They couldn't afford to buy their own homes. Many people rented their own homes. There wasn't a sense, and you're going to hate me, of entitlement.
Do you think that the young are entitled? James, you feel entitled?
No, not at all.
You feel entitled to own a home. That's entitlement.
How is that entitled to own your own home? Surely that's something that everyone should be able to achieve.
No. That's entitlement, because the proper boomer generation didn't expect that. They didn't feel entitled to own their own home.
Yeah, but they managed to do it though.
No, they didn't. Many people didn't. If you're talking about the proper boomer generation, which is a generation now in their 70s and their 80s, they didn't own their own home.
They are holding. I mean, there was a piece in the Sunday Times this week of Robert Colville. £5.5 trillion of wealth is being held by boomer generation. Now, when I say being held, it's not like they're hoarding that amount of cash, because that's perhaps where this ageism takes place. These are homes that people have worked very hard to pay for, paid taxes on, and have to somewhere to live. But there is that sort of perhaps the portrayal, James, that, you know, some of that generation, they've all got homes, they've all got wealth, and look at us, we're struggling to make it on the ladder. That's unfair, isn't it?
Yeah, it is unfair, but there's a wider issue there, that if you've got a society that's working well for everybody, regardless of age, if the older generations are satisfied with what they've got, they're looked after, they've got decent pensions, they've got winter fuel allowances, and then on the other side of the coin, young people have got opportunities for growth, for development, for career. If you've got that happy society, then we're not sat here having this conversation.
And it feels silly to have to pit one generation against another. Let's speak to Gary, who's got in touch from Kent. Gary, good morning. Do you feel that Britain's becoming anti-old people? That somehow old people are getting a rough deal?
Yes, I do. The older generation, like myself, are finding it harder and harder to get by, because the way things are now, everything is online. No one is available on the phone to talk, and it's very, very difficult. A lot of us are relying on our kids, our grandkids with this. So the younger generation look down on us because they automatically assume we should be savvy in this day and age, and it's not like that. So it is making life a lot harder for the elderly. Okay,
Gary, thank you. The technology kind of coming into everyday life is something that is tricky. I think Gary makes a very good point. Denise in Berkshire, good morning, Denise. Do you feel that Britain's becoming anti-old people?
Well, what I would say is that if you transferred in a split second youngsters of today back to when I was growing up, and even when my children were growing up, they're in their 50s now, they would think they were living in poverty. The thing is, rationing didn't finish till 1954, and there was no credit cards. You could only buy what you could afford, and quite often people went without. They just struggled. They did a lot of home cooking because you couldn't afford to. If you went out, it was generally a birthday, and it was a real treat. Now, people's priorities are different, and you know that they're entitled to it. But when we were buying a house, all our money went onto the mortgage. It was unbelievable. There was hardly anything left. And when my children needed shoes, there was a sale sign, and if they needed shoes, it was their turn if the sale sign was up in the shop.
Denise, I'm going to bring James into this, but before I do, I mean, some younger people listening would say you were lucky that you could get a mortgage. I mean, quite a lot of people are not able to get on that housing ladder. James, though, Denise makes a good point. You know, things like going out, and perhaps we forget that generation did go through a lot of difficult times.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to pit generations against each other and make comparisons, because you can always find grounds to support either argument in that way. I hear what Denise is saying. I really do. I think you know they certainly did struggle, but I do think it's unnecessary to say, oh, well, young people like going out and socialising too much, or they're a little bit frivolous with their money, because they've got to live, they've got to have a life, and I think we're doing a bit of a disservice to disposable income. Like, people don't have the money to spend. I mean, they certainly can't save up for a mortgage anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Denise, thank you for that. Gillian in Surrey, good morning, Gillian. What do you think? Do you think Britain's become anti-old people. They're being painted as sort of hoarders of wealth, and actually the young people can't get on the housing ladder because the older people own all the properties. What do you make of all that?
Well, I'm finding this very difficult, this subject, because I'm coming up against ageism all the time. I'm 85. My body might have let me down, but my mind hasn't. In fact, I've got a brain like sharp, cut glass. Well, I would pick up on one thing about mortgages. I was 40 before I could get my first mortgage. And my God, did I work to save, to put down the deposit. It wasn't put in our laps at all. And throughout the 40s, 50s, and the 60s, things were damned hard for all of us. And I was 40 when I managed to get enough for my first mortgage. But what I don't like today is being looked upon as, oh, she's an old lady. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I recently had to have some building done in my bathroom. Nobody would listen to me about it. In the end, they found that what I had to say was correct, because my experience of owning my properties in the past was right. And as for medical, they don't want to know. I know I am not getting the treatment I should do because I'm 85.
Gillian,
I'm finding this very difficult.
I can hear it. I can hear it.
A lot of difficult things,
I can hear it.
Recently.
I can hear it in your voice, Gillian. I can hear it in your voice, and I'm sorry that we're getting to the end. I don't have that much time, but Gillian, thank you for calling, and I hope things get better. And at least I know from us three here, we want to hear what you have to say. We think that you have a lot to offer. We think that experience, the lived experience that you bring to the rest of us, is hugely important. Learning from people who have lived that life is how we can make things better and how we can learn from people like you. So thank you for sharing. I'm sorry we didn't have enough time to talk a bit more, but hopefully we can talk a little bit more on another chance. But thank you for calling, Gillian.